In the early 2000s, JoJo was everywhere. You couldn't turn on the radio without hearing her. You couldn't walk into a mall without seeing her face on a poster. She was young, she could sing, she could sing. And her career was taking off fast, like fast enough that people started calling her the next big thing in pop. And then nothing. No sophomore breakout, no domination of the late 2000s pop scene, just silence. And if you were a casual listener, maybe you thought she quit, maybe you assumed she took a break or didn't want to be famous anymore. But that's not what happened. What actually happened is a lot darker. JoJo didn't just disappear because she wanted to. She disappeared because her record label trapped her legally, creatively, and professionally at the exact moment she should have been thriving. This is the story of how the music industry took one of the most promising young voices of the 2000s and kept her on mute for over a decade. Not because she wasn't good enough, but because the system isn't built to protect artists like her. Hello everyone, it's Nessi. Welcome back to the channel, or welcome if you're new. I make deep dives into the music industry because I'm genuinely fascinated by that world. I love exploring both the struggles and the successes of our favorite pop stars, the stories that happen behind the scenes, not just on stage. So if that's your kind of thing, make sure to subscribe, and without further ado, let's dive in. Let's rewind to the early 2000s. Flip phones, iPods, chunky highlights. It was the era of teen pop domination. Britney was still on top, Christina was showing off her range, and record labels were looking for the next big thing. Enter JoJo. Now imagine this. A 13-year-old girl from Massachusetts comes out of nowhere and releases a debut single that sounds like something a grown woman would belt out after catching her man cheating. A breakup song for people who hadn't even been on a date yet, but it was actually amazing. However, JoJo's story doesn't start with that hit. It starts way earlier, like Child Prodigy earlier. JoJo was raised in a small New England town by a single mom who also happened to be a singer. And when I say music was in her blood, I mean JoJo was doing Aretha Franklin covers at age 6. Most kids were singing the Barney theme song. She was belting Respect. She was constantly performing at talent shows, fairs, on local radio, and by the time she was 10, she had already appeared on Kids Say the Darnest Things and Destination Stardom. She even turned down a role on the Mickey Mouse Club reboot because her mom didn't want her to be a Disney product, and honestly, based on how that turned out for other child stars, she may have dodged a bullet there. But even without the Disney machine behind her, JoJo's voice did all the heavy lifting. She auditioned for Black Crown Records at just 12 years old. That's the same label that was home to Aaliyah and Timbaland, and when they heard her sing, they signed her almost immediately. Fast forward 1 year and JoJo's first single drops. It didn't just chart, it exploded. It peaked at number 12 on the Billboard Hot 100 and hit number 1 on the pop charts, which made her the youngest solo artist in history to top that chart. Her debut album went platinum. She was on TRL, touring with Usher, getting invited to award shows. She was doing big girl numbers with Teenage Girl Charm, and here's the kicker. She didn't have to rely on gimmicks, no over-sexualized image, no wild tabloid drama, just a 13-year-old with raw talent. Everything was lining up for her to become the next pop/R&B superstar. She had the talent, the critical praise, the fan base, and the receipts. She should have had a long, explosive career right along artists like Rihanna, Beyonce, and Alicia Keys. But there was one thing standing in her way, the same thing that kills most young artists before they could even start their careers: contracts. So let's talk about JoJo's label, Blackground Records. On paper, it sounded legit. It had history with Aaliyah, Timbaland, and other iconic artists, but behind the scenes, it was basically a cautionary tale disguised as a record label. JoJo signed her contract when she was just 12. Think about that. At 12, you're barely allowed to have your own email account, but she was already in legally binding agreements with music executives. And here's the wild part, she didn't just sign a record deal, she signed her future away. The label had full control over what she could release, when she could release it, and if she could release it at all. After her first album blew up, she went back into the studio to ride the wave of success. She recorded her second album, The High Road, which gave us this iconic song. It charted high, it did well, everything seemed normal, then radio silence. Her third album, which she started recording around 2007, was never released, not because it wasn't ready, not because it wasn't good, but because for some reason Blackground refused to give it a release date. And if you're thinking, well, she could have just left the label, well, no, she couldn't. JoJo was stuck, her contract locked her in, and Blackground refused to release her.
The lawyer that I had looked through the contract and was like, this is ironclad, you're never getting out of it.
We literally had litigators and attorneys tell her, you need to find a plan B because you're probably never going to be able to be a part of this industry again in a way that you're used to.
On top of that, they weren't even a functioning label anymore. They had no active distribution deal, no resources, no office, no team, but somehow they still legally owned her voice.
And I was like, oh my God, how is this possible? I signed this contract when I was 12. This is no longer a functioning record label. They don't have an office anymore.
And that's not even the darkest part. The stress of being silenced for years took a toll on her mental and physical health. JoJo has opened up about being pressured by execs to lose weight, to look a certain way, and to inject herself with hormones as a teenager, which is unbelievable. Like, how could you say this to a teenager who's still growing and developing?
You want me to be really skinny? And he's like, no, I wouldn't say that, blah, blah, blah. But I ended up getting put with a nutritionist that had me on a 500 calorie a day diet. And I was on these injections that make you have no appetite.
The label at that time was having you on a 500 calorie a day diet as a teenager.
I was 18.
Okay, so yeah.
And that is still a teenager.
That's still teen.
But
Did you think that was strange?
I thought it was not right. Yeah.
This wasn't just a contract dispute. This was psychological warfare dressed up as artist management. And when she finally sued to get out of the contract, it took another 4 years before she was fully released. JoJo was stuck and waiting while the industry moved on to the next teen pop star, waiting while people assumed she had just given up, waiting while fans thought she ghosted them, when in reality JoJo was being held hostage by a broken system. And worst of all, her original albums were pulled from streaming. The very songs that made her famous, gone. Blackground removed them from platforms like Spotify and Apple Music to block her from making money off of them, which is so petty. Why would you do that? It's cruel and it was calculated. And somehow JoJo stayed graceful through all of this, which is honestly so impressive because I would have burned the whole thing down and filmed it for content. Legally, JoJo couldn't release new music, but this wasn't just a technicality buried in the fine print. This was a systematic deletion of a young artist's voice wrapped in legal tape and masked as business. It wasn't just a stalled career, it was a form of psychological sabotage, the kind that chips away at your own identity until you start to believe the silence is your fault. Because when you're a teenager with platinum success and an entire future ahead of you, you expect your team to nurture your career, not bury it. But that's exactly what happened. JoJo has talked about how she would show up to meetings with label execs only to be told there was no budget for her project, or worse, no interest. Sometimes they wouldn't return her calls at all. And remember, this is someone signed to them, not some random demo artist. And let's not ignore what that does to a person, especially a teenage girl growing up in the public eye. She started internalizing it. She thought, maybe I'm not good enough, maybe it's my fault they don't want to put out my music, and that mindset is dangerous.
Maybe I'm just so disgusting that no one wants to see me in a video and that they can't even look at me. That's really what I thought.
But here's the kicker, the same label that demanded she change her body and appearance wasn't even investing in her music. It's like they wanted her to be a perfect image in a box they could own, not an actual artist with her own voice. And while all this was happening, the public assumed she had simply faded away, like she was a one-hit wonder who couldn't keep up, when the reality was she had multiple albums recorded, ready to go, and they were being held hostage. She couldn't tour, she couldn't drop singles, she couldn't grow. For nearly a decade, her career was in limbo. And what makes it worse is that nobody talked about it. There was no trending hashtag, no major artist calling out her label publicly. It was like she had been erased, and the industry was perfectly okay with that. So when we say JoJo was trapped, we don't just mean legally, we mean emotionally, creatively, and physically. She was caught in a system that demanded everything and gave nothing back, and the longer she was silent, the easier it was for the industry to pretend she didn't exist. After nearly a decade of being silenced, JoJo decided she wasn't going down without a fight. And I'm not saying that in a dramatic, clickbaity way, I mean literally legal action. In 2009, JoJo filed a lawsuit against her label for refusing to release her music and effectively freezing her career. She argued that the contract was illegal under New York law because it had lasted over 7 years.
My lawyers, Shannon and Hayes, combed through the contract and eventually found this thing in New York law that says that you can't keep a minor in a personal service contract for more than 7 years. And that statute was up. And then it was just kind of on from there.
It was a smart move, but like everything in her career, nothing came easy. The battle dragged on until 2013 when she finally got released from her contract. She had been stuck in label limbo since she was 15. She was now 22 in 2015. Imagine your entire adolescence and the peak of your pop star moment wasted in a legal mess you didn't cause. But JoJo didn't waste time. She signed with Atlantic Records and started working on what would be her comeback project, and in 2016 she dropped her long-awaited third studio album, Mad Love. The album was good, like really good. It was confident, mature, and filled with the kind of emotion you would expect from someone who's been through it. She collaborated with Alessia Cara, Wiz Khalifa, and even had a song titled I Am, which felt like a declaration of independence.
Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, that's what you do. It's time to change up.
But here's the thing, the industry had changed. The media didn't really know what to do with her. The industry loves a fixed narrative, and JoJo had many narratives. Was she a former child star comeback story, a new mature artist, a nostalgic name from the 2000s? The same people who played Too Little Too Late on repeat were now treating her like a legacy act at age 25. Despite that, JoJo was doing everything right. Promo runs, tours, she even hit the Today Show stage and did emotional interviews where she opened up about her struggles, including an eating disorder and pressure from the industry to be thinner. So this wasn't just a comeback, it was a reclamation of her narrative, her body, her voice, her everything. But again, the sad part, it didn't quite land commercially. Despite the strong vocals, well-produced tracks, and emotional weight, Mad Love didn't break records. It didn't catapult her back to the charts, not because it wasn't good, but because momentum in the music industry is crucial. Then came Good to Know in 2020, a project that had so much of that mature, soulful vibe that JoJo always had, but this time it was entirely on her terms. It was a testament to the resilience she built over the years. The music was incredibly personal. She dug into themes of love, heartbreak, and the journey of figuring out who you are after being defined by others for so long. And it was met with way more respect than her earlier albums in terms of its artistry.
I was like, if I can do something about this, let me try to do something about this. So I re-recorded my first 2 albums and a couple singles that were outside of that as well, and put them on streaming platforms under my own imprint, Clover Music. And that was just a part of me feeling empowered as opposed to like a victim of circumstances that I had nothing to do with.
That's it for today's video. Thank you so much for hanging out with me today. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please make sure to leave a like and subscribe for more content like this one. And let me know your thoughts in the comments. Do you think JoJo's journey is a case of mismanagement by the industry, or was there something more at play here? And if you were JoJo, would you ever trust the music industry again? Let me know in the comments. And if you have any suggestions for future videos, please let me know. This video was suggested by a viewer, so thank you. And with that being said, thank you for being here, thank you for watching, and I'll talk to you very soon.